So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Tsunade and Mikoto, so let's start the series. Even from this distance, the wrath of the Kyuubi could be felt, a tangible snarl of hatred that slashed and bit whatever it could find. The red glow of the Biju's chakra seeped through the window blinds, stripping his desk in thin fingers of red-black, and its flickering light was barely enough to see the design spiraling out over the infant's stomach. Minato's hand shook as the ink dripped onto his son's skin, the heated air drying the markings in a matter of seconds. Beneath his heavy white coat was a thin sheen of sweat that seemed to cling relentlessly to him as he moved, barely stopping to wipe his brow as the intense heat increased almost beyond endurance. Gently, he lifted the baby into his arms, ink splattering against wood as he let the brush tumble onto his desk. Before beginning his work, he had applied a genjutsu to the child to ensure he would sleep through the procedure, but Naruto had been awake long enough for his father to glimpse his startling blue eyes. Kushina had hoped that he would have those eyes. In fact, she'd loudly voiced her desire for their child to have all of his looks, if only so that he could inherit her sense of humor. Minato had wished otherwise. He felt any child of theirs would be far better off with at least some appearance inherited from their mother, but now he could only be glad of the resemblance. Perhaps it would make it easier for the village to treat Naruto as the hero he was if they could be reminded of who had made him into such. He would not fool himself into thinking that it would be an easy path. He had fought the Jinchuriki of Suna and Iwa in the war. He knew how most villages treated them, and yet, he knew he had to make this sacrifice for Konoha. All other obligations, including parenting, were subordinated to being a Hokage. Minato shook himself, furious at his hesitation, and made his way to the door as the Kyuubi's roar tore through the air and the reddish glow filtering through the window intensified into the white-hot radiance of a furnace as the beast's chakra surged. He had prayed, he had prepared, and he was as ready as he would ever be, but every second of delay meant more lives lost and more damage to the village he had sworn to protect. So still going through with this? Minato said, "Hello, Jiraiya-sensei," without bothering to turn around. With his countenance unusually solemn and his white hair hanging in the sun, the Sannin leaped down from the window. "You know what this will mean for him, don't you?" The infant continued to sleep with one chubby fist clenched in Minato's jacket as Minato straightened his shoulders and jostled Naruto. "I believe in Konoha, sensei, and I believe in Naruto as well. Out of all the children, he is the most suited to bearing the burden of being a Jinchuriki," Minato said. As the sound of the Kyuubi's tails shattered the atmosphere, loud enough to break the eardrums of anyone nearby, Jiraiya arched an eyebrow. "You don't think that he'll unlock the Kekkai Genkai, do you? It's been dead for decades, Minato, and the Kyuubi he doesn't need the full bloodline, sensei. Every senju has shown some aptitude at, if not fully restraining, at least avoiding the attacks of the Biju. Remember Tsunade Harem?" Jiraiya flinched, even though he had boasted about the Sannin's battle against the Ichibi of Suna in later years. The memory still made him shiver, especially now that his village was up against Shikaku's much more powerful opponent. The host had been awful enough, with its sunken eyes, waxy skin, drooling mouth, and rasping voice that sounded almost human, but the beast itself had been something out of a nightmare. However, despite his struggles with the Ichibi's scythe-like claws, howling wind attacks, and the constant choking sand, Tsunade had dodged most of the Ichibi's blows like a genin's shuriken, even hammering through the rippling shield of sand that had been nearly as fast as Minato's own Hiraishin. Jiraiya could still remember how Shikaku had seemed to instinctively back away from his teammate, how the whipping sands had seemed to slow down as Tsunade darted through them, and how the shield had broken under her blows like spun glass. While others might have attributed this to Tsunade's skill as a kunoichi, Jiraiya could not account for any of these things. Since the Shodai had been able to wield the Mokuton, Jiraiya could only think of one explanation, and that was in his teammate No Senju's bloodline. However, as long as the genes were still present, Kekkei Genkai could never completely disappear. Perhaps dormant for years, they would one day be reawakened in a member of the bloodline without any explanation, but never completely gone. It appeared possible that Tsunade, carrying the Mokuton in her genes, if not able to use it herself, had been able to perform a shadow of what the Shodai's mere presence had been able to do, though that was far from being able to use her grandfather's actual abilities herself, as so many Senju had yearned for. Jiraiya was aware that it couldn't be a skill issue because Tsunade was among the best Senju clan members and would undoubtedly be eligible to inherit the bloodline if strength was required. Minato, on the other hand, I know that, legally he's not, and never will be, part of that clan, but he's of their blood, and he's the best person available to be honest, the yondaime said with a bitter smile, as though he understood his sensei's thoughts. Jiraiya was at a loss for words. As a ninja, he was aware that no one was flawless, that no village could be the shining example of virtue and light that they might pretend to be, and that no clan was above reproach, but he was still shocked by the extent some people would go to in order to preserve those delusions. After all, when their wives became too old for them to want any more, the patriarchs of respected clans were not supposed to go elsewhere to find love. Young, impressionable kunoichi were not supposed to be courted by said patriarchs and then cast aside after the men had had their fun. Those kunoichi were not supposed to become pregnant and die during childbirth, and their offspring were not supposed to be abandoned and forgotten in orphanages. Furthermore, they were not intended to ascend from unwelcome brats to Hokages, who might even be more powerful than the Shodai himself. With a sorrowful smile, Minato said, "I have to go, sensei, but promise me you'll look after him, won't you?" as another roar echoed through the atmosphere like far-off thunder. Jiraiya inhaled deeply and said, "No, I'm not cut out for raising a kid. I want to find out who's responsible for this. I have to see to the village first. I can't take a kid on the run with me. I won't settle down in the village again, not after this." However, Minato was looking at him beseechingly, in need of the assurance. Jiraiya lied and said, "Yes, I promise. Underscore 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 underscore. He was an elderly man, and he was not eager to rest the weight of ruling on his aging shoulders. Nevertheless, he knew his duty and was quick to set about restoring order and dealing with the numerous problems that the yondaime had left to him, with one problem in particular becoming a noticeable thorn in his side. The sandaime had not been happy to come out of retirement to serve again as Konoha's leader, even if the village had not been half destroyed, with the survivors grieving and the other villages prowling around like wolves, ready to feast on the remains. The village was grieving, still roiling with impotent rage against the creature that had almost wiped them out, and the hatred for the creature seemed to have been transferred to the child that held it. Minato's instructions before he died had been clear: the defeat of the Kyubi could not have occurred without the use of a sacrifice to permanently restrain the Bijou, and the baby he had used for this purpose was to be honored by the village as much as the man who had given his soul to the Shinigami to ensure the end of the attack. In Suna or Kiri, this hatred might have manifested itself through physical assaults or even attempted assassinations, but since their Jinchuriki power was gradually surpassing even that of their Kage, it appeared that Kirigakure was starting to regret the attacks that had turned the Sanbai's host into the vicious creature that some claimed could take over their village. Konoha chose not to take this route, though the Sandaime had guards stationed around Naruto for several months after his birth, just in case. Instead, there was a cold, contemptuous hatred of him that seemed to have permeated most of the village, with most people seemingly preferring to act as though he didn't exist at all. In an effort to prevent things from getting worse, the Sandaime had Naruto move into one of the many orphanages that had been established or expanded in the wake of the Kyuubi's attack. Aside from feeding and changing the boy, the staff rarely spoke of him, even to each other. They were loyal and loved the children under their care, but they were only willing to show a certain amount of the creature's vessel, which would have destroyed them all if the Yondaime hadn't sacrificed himself to stop it. This may have been the reason why none of them could recognize the odd occurrences that were constantly occurring around him. The cot he was placed in was replaced after a few short weeks, and the wood seemed to have bent and warped over time, until the once solid structure had curved inwards, splintering and cracking into arms that cradled the baby. At first it was small things that were easy to ignore, like papers rattling on clipboards when people passed his cot, and edges curling towards him as flowers to the sun until they were batted down by irritated hands. The cots would appear to have bent and warped over time, and a new plastic crib was duly delivered, while an unfortunate staff member spent hours cleaning the floors and walls in search of wet rot. The flowers scattered in the grass outside started to move up the walls, blooms of white, green, and purple sprouting through the threaded cracks in the sun-baked wood. Once more, the staff came and removed them, and none of them mentioned how the plants had seemed to strain towards the window where the child slept. The only time Naruto was quiet was when he was allowed to play in the grass behind the orphanage. It was overgrown and sloped downward into a tangled thicket of trees, and while it was forbidden to the other children, everyone seemed willing to let him go outside if it would keep him quiet. By the time he was 6, his presence was becoming harder to ignore, specifically because he went out of his way to ensure this was the case. He was no longer content to remain quietly in his room, and he pestered the staff constantly, tried to butt into the games of the other kids until he was firmly shooed away, pulled pranks that caught the attention of the adults, made a mess when confined there, and generally behaved like an unholy terror. Naturally, there were hazards, forgotten traps, sleeping snakes, poisonous berries, and sharp stones, but for some reason, none of them seemed to affect Naruto, who would always fall back into bed late at night, exhausted and dirty but always joyful. This was sufficient for the staff, who never bothered to watch him play and thus never saw what he did while playing, let alone any other potential threats. Underscore 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 tonight was Uchiha Sensei's death date. He was fading, slowly but surely, and had long considered ending his own life without suffering. He didn't mind the thought. Months had passed since the medic-neens had given him the bad news, months since the cancerous growths had spread like poisonous flowers in his lungs, and months since his strength had started to wane as the pain and exhaustion bit into his bones. They were the ones who suggested this idea to him, this last use of a life that was guttering out in an ignoble end unworthy of a high-ranking Chunin. At that point, he had received some discreet messages that were relayed through a chain of reliable people that led to Sensei. Well, Sensei had never spoken to them directly, but such actions could only be approved by the highest command within the Uchiha clan. They would soon follow the path Madara-sama had laid out for them and strike at the center of Konoha, purifying and restoring it to what their clan had sacrificed their lives for in those early days when war raged and there had been no villages at all. The Uchiha had been oppressed for far too long and had been denied the glory that should have been theirs from the very beginning of Konohagakure. But first, things would need to change, with the Uchiha gradually destroying what remained of the past. If they wanted to succeed, they would need to make sure that nothing unexpected would happen when they took action. Every move would need to be made knowing exactly what was going to happen. And what could be more unpredictable, chaotic, and wild in its fortunes than the Kyuubi that squatted in their village as a child? However, times had changed, and the elders would no longer allow those who still occupied their proper position to release them. The Kyuubi was a wild card, and those who were born to recognize deceit were not fooled for a moment by the innocent mask it wore. It still possessed power, and who knew if the Sandaime would use it if they felt threatened enough? No, the Jinchuriki had to leave. Sensei was certain that even his deteriorating body could defeat the Kyuubi's current, weaker form, if he could provide nothing more. Sensei did not deceive himself about his ability to withstand Marino Ibiki's attentions. He had a poison capsule on his person. This was the end, and a much better one than what his illness would offer. It would be a suicide mission, of course. Even if the Kyuubi did not wound him in its attempt to defend itself, Anbu would swiftly find the man who killed their weapon and they would be sure to find out where he got the idea. Underscore 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 as he laid down on the soft, loamy ground with his back to one of the enormous trees that appeared to be everywhere. Naruto laughed. One of the orphanage's girls, Ami, refused to go near the back of the building because she was afraid the trees would devour her. Naruto thought that was the dumbest thing ever because trees didn't have mouths, so they couldn't eat people, and even if they did, they were too awesome to want someone as disgusting as her. He told her that, but all he got was a reprimand. Ami laughed at him and asked why he didn't just go live in the dirt, like the trees did. Though it was getting dark, Naruto didn't mind because he'd been out here a lot by himself and he didn't need anyone to look after him like the other kids did. It didn't even matter that none of them would care anyway. He'd gotten Ami back, though, because there was a tin of paint above her door right now, and she would be splattered bright green as she opened it. Only then would another adult yell at him. Naruto frowned to himself as he kicked his feet on the grass and felt the pine needles tickle his bare feet. He heard insects chirping in the distance and narrowed his eyes to see if he could see any by himself, but there were plenty of plants, including bright flowers, spiky weeds, and gnarly trees, all pushing through the thick carpet of grass. Naruto flicked a short yellow flower and inhaled the sweet, sticky smell that pervaded the Yamanaka shop. "The flowers here are better," he said to the clearing, and it sounded as if every leaf in the area were rustling in agreement. He nodded to himself and used one of the tree's protruding roots to push himself to his feet. He didn't even want anyone to be with him out here, really, because he had a lot of fun by himself, even though the plants could get a little weird. He once fell into a bush and got so tangled up in it that he couldn't get out for an hour. It was almost like it was clinging to him. Another time, he fell asleep in a bunch of flowers, and when he woke up, he was nearly totally covered in them, his nose tickled until he almost sneezed. He felt mean about crushing them, but it meant he had to carefully pick them off one by one, which took hours. Perhaps because they were mature trees, this one was over 60 years old, he never had issues like that with large trees like this. "At least you're not silly like that," he said to the pine behind him, encouragingly caressing its speckled white bark. Since he was unable to provide evidence, none of the other children believed him when he said that some of the trees were even older. He simply knew these facts about the trees, just as he knew he had a tongue and 10 toes. Even worse, the head of the orphanage, Mrs. Akachi, acknowledged that it was true and that some of the trees had existed there before the Shodai founded Konoha. However, even at that time, everyone believed he had learned about it from a book and didn't believe him when he claimed he didn't need a dumb book to know about that. Naruto was so consumed by his thoughts about how unfair everything was that he failed to notice the ninjas creeping through the trees with their crimson, whirling eyes focused only on him. Underscore 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 Sensei had taken care to put on a normal front as he strolled through the village, its golden streets warm and inviting in the late evening light. He smiled at people, nodded courteously to those he recognized, and even struck up a conversation with a few, though most of his acquaintances wrinkled their noses when they smelled the stench of alcohol on him. He had spent the majority of the day sitting in bars, looking sullen as he ordered drink after drink, drumming his fingers in a never-ending beat against the polished tables. His wife, Sayuri, had died in the Kyubi attack, and it was odd that he still felt pain at the thought of her. Everyone would assume that this had been a drunken attempt at retaliation, not a premeditated assassination. Even if they had suspicions, why would they bother looking into the death of the monster that had killed so many? And maybe, he had told himself as he gazed down into the amber liquid he had been nursing for hours, it would be cathartic to be the one to send Sayuri's killer into the afterlife, even if only briefly. Would the beast scream as he cut its throat, or would it allow itself to revert to the hideous form that was its true face as it died? Sensei was unaware, but the possibility of finding out soon made his heart race. Eventually, he had peeled away from the hustle of the main street and slipped into the shadows provided by crooked roofs and the waning sunlight. Whoever had set this private mission within the clan had done their homework. He knew both which orphanage the demon had been placed in and where exactly it was located. He ducked down a side street, crossed over the Nakano River upon a bridge that echoed even the lightest of footsteps, listening to the dank black water lapping at the railings with a sense of resigned finality. In the distance, he could see the short, box-like structure that had been the Kyubi's home for the last 5 years. Closing his eyes, he fanned out his senses, trying to detect the overpowering chakra that even a human form could not hide. To his annoyance, he could find no sign of it within the building itself, but a wider search caught the faintest flicker of a trail, leading away into the small forest that lurked at the back. While puzzled at how faded it seemed to be, the Kyubi's chakra ought to blaze as bright as the sun, not be as soft and light as the chakra of, well, a tree. He followed it in, teeth bared in a grin as he drew closer to his target. Sensei took a shuriken from his pouch and, with a deliberate flick of his wrist, sent it whistling through the air towards its mark. The demon was hiding in the very center of the forest, where the sharp-smelling pines drew close together and little light filtered through the dense canopy of needle-like leaves. Its bright gold hair was a painted target against the dark, and it was crouching against the ground as it peered at the coiled roots of a tree. The child was about to look up when a thick branch drooped in front of it, sending splinters of pale bark flying as the steel tips cracked home. The vessel gasped, its eyes darting around in search of the attacker. With its hands on its hips, it yelled in outrage, "Hey, you jerk! Watch where you're throwing that," when it finally saw him emerge from the grass. Sensei pulled a kunai from his belt instead of responding, and even though his hand was trembling a little, he knew that this would all be over soon. He watched the child's eyes widen as it took in the blade, and he heard it stammer out a new demand for answers with trembling bravado, but it all seemed oddly far away under the excitement of this claim to the Uchiha's glory. He took a step forward, enjoying the way the child recoiled against the tree trunk as he raised the kunai. Sensed the air's abrupt surge of chakra, heard a moist creak and a snap as the moon was blotted out against a surge of rustling darkness as the shadows moved. After then, there were just screams. Underscore 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 underscore. The forest was old, and the trees were tall and thick enough to blot out her house 20 times over. Chakra hummed over the soles of her feet, anchoring her into place, but from way up here that wasn't very comforting. Kiyumi shifted her weight on the branch and squirmed as she looked over the edge of it to see the shattering drop below. Her small, skinny frame, still awaiting the growth spurt enjoyed by everyone else her age, seemed especially fragile against the thick boughs, like an ant clinging to a twig. If she fell, it would be a long way down. The taller, thicker trees surrounding them blocked out most of the light, leaving only a greenish tint. The horrifying light made Kiyumi feel as though she was underwater, and it wasn't enough to see her teammate below her, let alone a speeding hellbeast. She cautiously leaned forward, hoping to see if the blasted animal was anywhere below her. She let go of the chakra beneath her feet and fell from the branch, landing in front of her colleague on the springy grass with her knees braced to withstand the impact. "I can't see it anywhere," she said. Kiyumi could only watch in envy as Yuki nodded and looked completely uninterested as she turned to look at the trees around them. It was eerily quiet, with no birdsong or breeze to disturb the area, and Yuki herself made no sound as she ghosted over the slimed pine needles beneath their feet. The noise she had made as she blundering through the forest had likely been what initially startled the poor cat away. It's true that she had been nearly silent by civilian standards, but there was a big difference between that and shinobi standards, and Tora was essentially a B-rank ninja in his own right, based on how many times he had eluded the daimyo's wife. "We'll have to search the entire forest if we hope to find him. The daimyo's wife must return to her estates by tomorrow, and she wants Tora back by then." Incredulous, Kiyumi looked up from where she had been cleaning her scraped hands. "You know, we'd find him a lot quicker if you'd use your bloody Byakugan dash." As she swept across the forest floor, Yuki sniffed contemptuously, not disturbing a single leaf. "Quicker, perhaps, but I have no desire to experience another headache. I have been using it all day. It was less than 5 hours. I know you're not that good at it, but can't you I've used it enough today. Awaken your own bloodline first before you start telling me how to use mine," Yuki said, pausing, her dark hair silvered in the moonlight and turning her blank white eyes to her colleague. Her voice was colder than the snow for which she was named. "Don't worry, my aunt's already on my case about it. You're right, I can't even work my own bloodline, I shouldn't judge, Kiyumi said, forcing out a laugh as her hands darted to her eyes, which she knew would be completely black in the dim light, without even the flicker of a Sharingan to brighten them. Jin-sensei had already lectured her enough about her inability to get on with Kagawa, so she didn't need problems with Yuki either. Few people knew more about the drawbacks of belonging to a clan than the branch Hyuga, and Yuki's own weak Byakugan range had to irritate her as much as Kiyumi's lack of the Sharingan. Although she had intended it to sound humorous, even she could hear the bitterness leaking into the words. Yuki clearly heard it too, based on the awkward look she gave Kiyumi and her own apprehensive gesture towards the headband that covered the poisonous green design on her pale skin. Well, I suppose it doesn't matter, we couldn't catch him with all three of us here in daylight, I suppose we'll just have to wait until he gets tired, Yuki said softly, marking the closest they would ever come to offering an apology. Although Yuki's hair was still in its intricately coiled plait, with the faint starlight glinting off her jeweled hairpins and the mirror-bright shine of her headband, and her kimono as immaculately white as when she'd put it on this morning, Kiyumi would never admit it, but she'd kill to have even half of Yuki's grace and delicacy, even if her teammate was an arrogant cow most of the time. Kiyumi nodded and squirted as she ran a hand through her mane of wild black hair, which had looked halfway decent in the morning, but had been tangled and sticky with sap from where she'd blundered into a particularly nasty thicket. If we want to get it back by daybreak, we need to hurry, Yuki said, looking up at the sky as they had walked, which was quickly turning reddish-pink like salmon flesh. If you have any suggestions, I'm all ears, Kiyumi said, raising an eyebrow while cautiously avoiding a suspicious-looking burrow. We could try laying bait. Yuki thought. We tried that before, it didn't work. Well, in retrospect, perhaps it wasn't a good idea to let Kagawa handle the fish, not a good idea. His dog ate them. And then vomited everywhere. Well, put it this way, at least we know another weakness of the Inuzuka now, weaknesses that we can use against him when we spar next, Yuki said, sighing in frustration as she cautiously ducked under an overhanging branch. The trees appeared to be getting thicker here, pushing closer and closer to the narrow path they had been following. Are you going to fight Setsuna and Kagawa with fish? Well, if you have any dash, Kiyumi said, recalling belatedly how much she detested being teased, and Yuki scowled. The two girls froze as a low, anguished scream split the air as it tore towards them. Then came another cry, the scream of a man in complete pain and terror, until it was abruptly cut off in a terrible finality. Kiyumi's hand shot to the sword by her side as her heart pounded, but Yuki was quicker. Her hands flew into seals, and she turned to face the scream's direction with a grimly determined expression. Byakugan, she said. What is it? What's happened? Kiyumi tensed, already drawing her blade, as a spiderweb of veins bulged around her eyes. Kiyumi might have thought her expression was hilarious at any other moment, but here, in the forest of screams, it chilled her to the bone. She grabbed Yuki's arm with her free hand and shook her when she didn't respond. What is it? She asked, her mouth gaping open in an almost comical display of shock. Yuki's voice faltered as she said, "It's," and she turned to Kiyumi with a shocked, incredulous expression. "It's a child," she said. "There's a hurt kid." She needed no further answers. Letting go of Yuki, Kiyumi turned and raced for the source of the screams, realizing with a sickening jolt that she could smell blood as she flung herself through the trees. If making her way through the forest had been difficult before, it was nearly impossible now. Weaves of vines, thorny and tangled, lashed her even as she tried to duck underneath them, the path narrowed further and disappeared completely against the thicket of trees, and the sharp-scented leaves thickened and spread until she was using her ears and not her eyes to fight her way through the mesh of woods. She could hear something as she struggled, a faint, gasping sobbing, a whimper that was more like that of a wounded animal than a human child. Awful as it was to listen to, the sound gave Kiyumi hope. If they were still conscious, if they could make a noise, they might not be too badly injured to be moved. If she and Yuki could only be quick enough, they could find them, get them back to the village before the guards changed, and take them to the hospital. Despite her caution, she nearly missed the child, barely seeing a glimpse of gold. She crouched once more, flinching as a particularly thorny branch pulled at her hair, and then, there he was. The child, a boy, someone's little boy, was sitting curled in the hollow of the biggest pine tree Kiyumi had ever seen. The tree's shockingly white bark seemed to curve almost protectively around the child, and the large fissure that protected him was red-black and oozing with a dark, thick sap, with the exception of a small patch of white that was likely some moss. Kiyumi dropped to her knees and silently thanked him, reaching out to him as he sobbed quietly into his knees. "Hey, are you okay? Don't worry, everything's fine, we've come to dash." The boy's head snapped out at the sound of her voice, and Kiyumi found herself staring into a pair of wide, scared blue eyes. The boy scrambled further back into the tree with a muffled shriek, and as Kiyumi tried to reach out, her hand snagged on a spiked weed that twisted out of nowhere. She let out a pained yelp, wincing as she felt the warm wetness of her blood and the scratch. The boy's head poked out, and to Kiyumi's confusion, she noticed that more vines were draped around his limbs. Where had they come from, in this tangled thicket of trees? However, instead of adhering to him, they were rolling up to confront her like a Suna snake. Don't come near me." Kiyumi raised her hands in the hopes that he wouldn't notice the blood dripping over her palm. Judging from the blood stench, the child was clearly scared and hurt. She needed to get him back to Konoha as soon as possible, but it would be too difficult if he was too scared to come. She softened her voice as much as she could and held out a hand while observing the vines stiffen around him in their mock embrace. What the hell was going on, that the commonplace plants she had always encountered were behaving like that? "My name's Uchiha Kiyumi, I'm a genin from Konoha. You're from there as well, right?" He looked at her for a long time as the leaves around her rustled in warning. She made an effort to maintain the warm grin, and he nodded barely perceptibly, which Kiyumi took as a positive sign. "What's your name?" she said. It appeared for a second that he would not respond, then, "Uzumaki Naruto." Although Kiyumi had never been given a personal reason to dislike the child, in fact, she had never seen him before, she had heard that name before, usually followed by a round of profanity. As far as she could tell, the adults all disapproved of him for some reason, but they would never say what, they would only advise her to avoid him. "Naruto, huh? That's a nice name," she said, but this was different. He was clearly just a scared youngster in need of assistance, and she wasn't going to abandon him here for an unanswerable cause. "Huh?" he asked, staring at her with a doubtful expression. "It's a little strange that it's named after a ramen topping, but perhaps his parents had been huge fans of the stuff. Like I said, Naruto, I'm a genin and I can bring you back to the village, I'm sure you're," she said, tapping the band knotted around her arm. Parents? Had he got any? What kind of parent would have allowed their child to roam aimlessly through the night in the forest? Kiyumi couldn't remember hearing about any other Uzumakis. She did recall, though, hearing her aunt lament that the Sandaime was a gentle touch on that awful, filthy child. Possibly the two were acquainted. The Hokage, she tried once more, feeling encouraged by Naruto's recognition. My friend and I will take you back to the Hokage, he'll make sure you're safe, okay? She said. The youngster seems to think, really? Really, but first, you're going to have to let me help you, Kiyumi said, nodding and extending her arms. She examined the vines and was very troubled when they reluctantly withdrew from the child, their thorns rubbing against the tree's wood. Can you come out? Kiyumi said. She reached forward, prepared to pick Naruto up as he crawled forward slowly, but to her surprise, he fell into her, his eyes closing. I'm not sure how old he was, but Kiyumi carefully pulled him up into an awkward carry and settled him against her hip as if she had seen other Uchiha moms carrying their own children. 5. However, he was lighter than she had anticipated, and she was quite certain she could at least take him back to the gates. Kiyumi. It was hardly pleasant to find a child lost alone in the woods, but the Uchiha didn't see what Yuki had found so terrible about it. At least the child was safe now. About time you showed up, we need to go, he just fell asleep. I don't know what's wrong with him, the Uchiha said, looking up to see Yuki appear in the clearing, her chest heaving as she stared down at Kiyumi with wild white eyes. Kiyumi, Yuki said, her voice shaking even though the volume had decreased somewhat. Kiyumi could sense the panic that threatened to overtake the Hyuga. Put him down, she said. Kiyumi gazed at her, barely believing what she was hearing. She was aware that the child was despised by others, and she might not often be around him, but why had Yuki looked at him with such, fear? Did she know him at all? Excuse me. Look at him, he's exhausted, he's asleep, he's probably got hypothermia, we need to get him back. The kami know what's happened to him. When Yuki said, I think I know what's happened, she moved close enough for Kiyumi to see the horror in her pale eyes. Kiyumi, turn around, and look at what he's done, she urged. Kiyumi turned around in surprise and stared at the tree behind her. Aside from the one white patch that Kiyumi thought was moss, the tree stood still, its bark red and sticky with sap. She approached slowly, barely believing what she was seeing as the thing finally came into focus and she realized what the tree was concealing. Jutting from the tree was a hand, a human hand, with thick, black blood dripping from its wrist. After Kiyumi stumbled back in disbelief, Yuki took the initiative and began to pry at the bark until it came away red and dripping, exposing the crushed, swollen face of the man who had once been him, the red wreckage of his mouth permanently set open in a last, wordless scream. Kiyumi remained where she was, staring up at the body in the tree with a blank expression of shock, her arms still holding the child who had caused it, while Yuki, trying to remain composed, carefully dropped the bark she had just wrenched from the tree, shuddering as she looked at the sticky red residue it had left on her fingers. No Hyuga would have dreamed of hanging around with Uzumaki Naruto, the troublemaker, the prankster, the one every parent told their child to avoid, because he was too impoverished, too dirty, and too bent on chaos. Yuki's clan had warned her explicitly that the child was untrustworthy. How many times had Yuki, passing by on missions or free time, seen the child running around laughing through the village, followed by an angry victim of his antics, or sitting by herself, staring longingly as other kids played. Although he was a lonely child and not one to be seen with, Yuki had stifled any sympathy that might have arisen from that for the sake of her clan. His antics were always annoying, but they never came across as malicious. Even now, when he is a small, thin child with spiky yellow hair and a dirty t-shirt, it almost seems funny to think that he could actually hurt anything, let alone swat a fly. However, Yuki was suddenly unable to find anything amusing. "I know him," Kiyumi finally croaked, her face paler than the corpse in the tree. It was a man, with graying hair and bulging eyes that were still tinted red from his now inert Sharingan, bloody mouth and nostrils, and a twisted, grotesque face from that last, frozen scream. His distorted face looked barely human, let alone someone Yuki could recognize, but as she stared up at him, Kiyumi's face had turned to the color of soured milk. "That's that sensei, Officer Sensei, he was a friend of my uncle, he works in the police Kiyumi said. She paused, seemingly starting to realize that this was someone she knew, who had passed away horribly and for a reason neither of them wanted to consider, and turned away, appearing gravely ill. Yuki couldn't blame her because she was resisting the urge to become ill herself, but she made an effort to ignore her own shock and think clearly. Even though she was born with the ability to use taijutsu, they had praised her for it in the academy. She had a clinical outlook, mapped out scenarios, and followed the rules they set. She was able to admit that her Byakugan was weak, and when taijutsu failed her, she turned to her brain and tried to use it instead. Despite her prestigious clan name, it had not helped her make friends, so they put her on a team with Kiyumi, a disgrace to her clan's name, who was as bad with the Uchiha's prized genjutsu as Yuki was with her clan's taijutsu. When Yuki realized who she was carrying and what he had done, she felt a nauseating lurch of horror that words could not express. Kiyumi was the closest thing Yuki had ever had to a friend. Since it was her Kekkei Genkai that allowed the Hyuga to brand her with the curse mark and sentence her to a lifetime of servitude, the Byakugan, her greatest asset and, in some ways, her ultimate curse, had immediately seen the buried corpse, the body that was still mostly hidden in the tree's heart, the crushed bones, the pulped flesh, the blood pooling at the tree's roots, the child cowering at the tree's foot, the blood soaking him despite the fact that he had no wounds, and her teammate running towards him without knowing where she was going. However, they had seen more than that. There was a bright, blue chakra that was still present in the tree. It was the same chakra that was coursing through the child's coils and Kiyumi's arms, blending with the pale yellow-green chakra that had kept the tree alive from the beginning. What the tree had done with that boost of chakra, the remnants of the Uchiha's arms and legs were encircled by roots, and Yuki was able to determine what had happened simply by following the remnants of the chakra in the air. The man had been sucked into the center of the tree, and the trunk had encased him. The red remnant of his flesh had been cut through and drawn up, leached of everything it contained, leaving only a pink-white mess to stain the hollowed-out black. He had been completely consumed, and by a tree that had cradled a small child in its roots, the Uchiha's blood was staining his golden hair. Yuki was unaware of any jutsu that could accomplish that, and the older branch members quickly cut off any further questions about the odd child, including those from the clan heiress, claiming that Uzumaki was a clanless orphan. He shouldn't have had access to jutsu strong enough to destroy an adult like that, let alone a full-grown Uchiha. Yuki didn't even want to consider what the man had been doing with the child in a forest in the middle of the night in the first place. She wasn't sure if Uzumaki had parents, but surely there were guardians, someone to look after him and prevent him from being in such places. If this hadn't been a deliberate attack, it might have been an accident, an uncontrollable lashing out of power, but that would normally only occur in bloodlines, and the user would have had to be under so much stress that they would naturally reach for that which they couldn't handle. However, none of that was important at the moment. What was important was that Uzumaki, who was already a suspicious child, was unquestionably a witness, if not an outright suspect, in the death of Uchiha, a police officer, and that he was being held by a member of the same prestigious clan. Even if he was unconscious, Kiyumi could still be in danger from him, and Yuki would not allow this child to harm her teammate in the same way. Kiyumi, put him down. The Uchiha turned to face her, but Yuki felt as though she wasn't really seeing her. The girl's face was white, her eyes were wide, shocked, and only her arms remained in place, supporting Uzumaki, who appeared deceptively innocent with his golden hair and plump cheeks, eyes closed as his head lolled against Kiyumi's neck. Her shock wasn't surprising, though, because even by shinobi standards, these kills had been unnatural, absolutely horrible, and they had been someone Kiyumi had known, not like the would-be infiltrators they had swiftly and silently killed and wept over for hours afterward. Kiyumi, as if to shake off the scene, Kiyumi shook her head and said, fuck, what the how did this happen? Yuki, a 12-year-old girl who was both a ninja and a hyuga, swallowed as she deactivated her Byakugan. The sight of the mangled body made her sick to her stomach, and she knew that Kiyumi had to put him down because he was involved. As Kiyumi beheld the infant in her arms, the dark marks of drying blood betrayed her confusion. What? You believe he was responsible for this? Yuki, he's only a child, she said. Maybe, Yuki, you didn't see him. He was terrified. I don't think he could have done that. Kiyumi said while shaking her head and clearly avoiding looking up at the child. Yuki refused to agree and instead shook her head and said, let's take him back to the village. She wanted to explain to Kiyumi that he had every right to be scared after killing Uchiha and the police, because the consequences would have been devastating. I am the one who is being referred to here. The sun had risen, washing the sky in a gentle ripple of gold. Looking at it through the window as he shook his hands out, joints popping and crackling as he stretched them, Sarutobi found it quite pleasing to see. There were few benefits to having to stay up all night to finish paperwork, but the brilliant sunrise would always be one of them. It reminded him of his time as a young man, on missions with Hamura and Koharu, when he kept watch through the night until daybreak, easier times, perhaps happier ones, but he would not allow himself to be drawn into nostalgia, that oft-sprung trap for the old. Instead, Sarutobi laid down the last of his paperwork with a pleased sigh. At last, after more than 4 hours of non-stop toiling, he had finally finished every last piece, as well as getting through that supremely unnecessary council meeting. Why the Uchiha had to hammer out yet another law for the civilians to obey when there were already too many for even the military police to remember without aid of the Sharingan was beyond the Sandaime. He glanced at the clock on the wall. There was just enough time to have a pleasant smoke before heading to the Hokage mansion and finally getting some sleep. Hokage-sama. Unless the cosmos decided to stop him and show how much it hates all Hokages again, an Uchiha has been murdered. Hokage-sama, Uchiha-sensei, a member of the military police, the ANBU stood in the doorway, their face concealed by an eagle mask. Sarutobi looked up, fighting back the urge to cry out in rage. A chill ran through the Sandaime like a river of ice. Tensions had been rising over the Uchiha, and discussions with them had become as fruitless as flinging flint in front of a powder keg. The abduction of a member of their own, especially a police officer, might have been the final straw. Where? And who were the perpetrators? The forest. Hokage-sama, a team has already been sent to retrieve the remains, and the ANBU seemed to hesitate, which Sarutobi picked up on. And Uzumaki Naruto was found at the scene of the crime, with a chilling expression on his face. Sarutobi demanded of the ANBU, explain. two genin found him by the base of a tree, frightened and severely depleted of chakra, and Hokage-sama, the body was found within the tree itself. Having been pulled in there after the flora was manipulated by chakra that clearly corresponds to that of Uzumaki, it bears a strong resemblance to Tenzu-san's jutsu. What? I am the one who is being referred to here. As he bobbed in a white sea, curled up in himself, Naruto was vaguely aware of a few things: a strange knocking sound, rat-a-tat-tat against his ears, the strong odor of cleaning fluids like those used in the orphanage, an obnoxious beeping, and, most annoying of all, a faint tugging sensation that pulled relentlessly at his thoughts, until all he could focus on was the sensation itself. Naruto squinted his eyes shut because he preferred this place, this warm and safe softness. He didn't want to leave. Naruto. The whiteness was fading, replaced by the warm darkness of his closed eyelids. Naruto moaned half-heartedly, hoping they could stay closed, but he knew he had to wake up now. The voice seemed friendly and somewhat familiar. Slowly, the young boy opened his eyes. He was lying on a narrow bed in a small room with whitewashed walls, and he realized as he looked around that it was probably a hospital of some kind. The beeping noises had come from some monitors that were sitting to one side, flashing red and green lights, while the knocking noise came from a fan in a corner, its constant droning interrupted by its blades rattling against warped metal. A small window was mostly blocked by a withered sunflower in a cheerful yellow pot that was brighter than its petals. Strips of light were plastered to the wall, and they were so bright that Naruto screwed up his eyes as he looked at them, but he didn't look for long, because next to the bed was a chair, and sitting in that was someone Naruto was actually happy to. Gigi. Hello, Naruto, I'm glad to see you're finally awake. I was quite worried about you, the elderly man said, his smile barely reaching his eyes. Clad in his lengthy Hokage robes and wearing a top hat, Naruto briefly pondered why the man was in the room instead of his office. Feeling bewildered, Naruto fought to sit up. Awake? He asked. He had no recollection of dozing off. A man approaching him, his eyes as crimson as blood, fire whizzing over the sky. He was approaching with a knife, and there was nowhere to hide. In a jam, with no escape route, wishing for a savior, anything at all, a squeaky sound out of nowhere, the coagulant, keep you safe, I promise. The plummeting as if in slow motion. Naruto's recollections came flooding back. Had he murdered that man? I didn't intend to. I can't have but he had killed him. The tree had done his bidding, and now the old man was going to punish him, perhaps even kill him, for something that wasn't his fault and that he hadn't intended to do. A sudden clatter interrupted his train of thought, and he blinked up in confusion. Outside the window swung a sunflower, its petals flapping like a fist, and the stalk crackled as it twisted through the air, heading straight for Naruto. As he stared up in bewilderment, the sunflower drooped over his shoulder, a dusting of small brown seeds on his shirt from its brushing against him like a cat. His eyes darted to the elderly man, but all he could muster was a little sigh in response. I was afraid as much. But do not worry, Naruto. You are not in trouble, for once in your life. With his shoulders slumped, Naruto gazed at him and said, Gigi, I didn't. The Sandaime tried to reassure Naruto by saying, I know, meaning that Naruto would not have harmed the man. However, he still needed Naruto to explain what had transpired. I am the one who is being referred to here. Even though the Sandaime had only gotten fragments of Naruto's story, it was sufficient for him to put together the truth and, in turn, determine his next move. As he stepped out of the hospital room, an ANBU appeared alongside a whirl of leaves. The man's porcelain mask barely concealed his apparent reluctance in the face of the Sandame's evident wrath. "Your will, Hokage-sama. Ibiki, you must double your efforts into the Uchiha clan. I want to know exactly what Uchiha Sensei's motives might have been and whether he was acting alone," Sarutobi said, his jaw clenched and his fingers flexing as if he were about to unleash some of his more damaging jutsus. "Undoubtedly, in the Kyubi's attack, his wife perished," the Anbu murmured softly. "Surely that was motive enough. Perhaps or perhaps not, nonetheless, my orders stand, but be sure to be sensitive, the Uchiha are going to be out for blood over this, yes, Hokage-sama." The Sandaime rubbed his face in exhaustion. The attack seemed a bit too planned, in his opinion. Chasing a child through a dark forest wasn't exactly the spontaneous move of a drunken, desperate man, but it was certainly within the realm of possibility for a vengeful ninja. They would need to be cautious around the Uchiha. Fugaku had grown more aggressive during council meetings, and Sarutobi was unhappy with the whispers being passed to him by certain individuals. A false accusation could ruin what little progress had been made on that front. Something still didn't quite sit right with him. He would have to rely on Ibiki to help him with this, but there was more work to be done. "I don't want this getting out before it has to. Have the genin who retrieved him sent to my office, and make sure that they understand that they are not to breath a word about this to anyone if they don't want instant demotion, and contact Jiraiya. There is much that we have to discuss." As the Sandaime shut his eyes, the Anbu vanished in a whirlwind of leaves. "Uzumaki Naruto, heir to the Mokuton, this is going to be fascinating." The impending storm in Konoha was accompanied by a thick cloud of humidity that seemed to engulf everyone on the streets, causing a cold sweat to drip down their backs. Very few people were rushing through the smoke-gray fog that clung to the cobblestones. The weather seemed to be sending a message that only the most pressing matters shouldered to be handled indoors. The Uchiha district was no different. Both civilians and shinobi of the clan had already fled indoors. It was unclear if the ominous sky or some other factor had caused this, but just hours earlier, the clan's elders had been called to an emergency meeting, and with it, a wave of panic had swept over the clan. No one knew for sure what was being discussed, but the overwhelming sense of dread had kept the rest of the Uchiha indoors, where they remained, shutters firmly fastened against the high, sharp wind that scraped against the wood like a knife against stone. No one dared to glance at the clan head's house, where the elders had been summoned. Despite being the most lavish house in the neighborhood, its opulence was obscured by the overcast weather. The only source of light was a faint glow emanating from behind closed blinds and windows, which had been secured long before the first cloud appeared. With no one home to break the stifling silence, the clan head study revealed a flicker of movement, a gentle light filtering through the room screens like a paper lantern, accompanied by the urgent sounds of voices. "Told you it would not work, it should have done. Damn Sensei for a fool, if he had only followed instructions. Hold your tongue." Sensei-san knew what had to be done, and he was willing to give his life for the good of the clan. Do not mock his sacrifice. He made it clear that he knew exactly what he had to do and when. "We must have been misinformed. The demon must have had guards after all. We were simply not prepared." A crack rang out when a hand struck a desk. "Then we should have been." This was a vital operation, one that needed every care to be taken, every method available used to ensure its success. Now more than ever must we rely on our own intelligence about the village. Now must we use only the strength of our own ninja, and you tell me that the most crucial operation at hand has been blown because no one checked if there were guards. There was the sound of porcelain hitting wood, the clearing of a breathing passage, guards were checked for, our friends in the Hokage Tower even examined the rota and questioned the secretary through genjutsu. The child has been without guards since the first 3 years of his life. It was the obscurity of the orphanage that the Sandaime relied on to protect him. Something must have gone wrong, but it was not the fault of Sensei or any others who helped to prepare him, and with respect, I would not call it our most crucial operation. Its failure is a disappointment, certainly, but it changes little. There are many points of weakness within the village that can and will be targeted, but many can be dealt with once the main operation has succeeded. I want the demon dead as much as any other, but the threat is not so urgent at this time. The Jinchuriki is still a child that demolished a full-grown Uchiha. If the Sandaime unleashes him, he will not. Sarutobi is a fool, and a soft one besides. He will not use the demon when it hides in a child, not even in the academy. Do you not recall how he fought against Itachi's ascension as a ninja? It does not sit well with him to use children in battle, not when he likes to play the part of Konoha's doting grandfather. In war, he will shed their blood freely and not offer a tear, but peace has been his undoing. He will not bring himself to use a child as a weapon. You call that weakness, a fresh voice said. But the old monkey is cunning. Our clan burns anew where the Senju withered, and Itachi is the brightest flame of all. Sarutobi robs our youth of their glory, presses them down to the level of the other clans, holds them back in the academy when they could be striding forth on the battlefield, bringing honor and fear to the Uchiha name. He cripples us, and we call him blind for doing so. Do not delude yourself. He may cling to peace, but push him and he will unleash a firestorm. The Kyubi is loyal to him, and he will use it if necessary. Sensei was only the first that will fall to its power. We do not even know how Sensei died. More likely that there was an ANBU lurking to watch over the child and he was dispatched as soon as he moved to slay it. There is no reason to think that it was any action of the Kyubis that defeated him. We do not even know if the beast can be unleashed. The Yondaime seal was of his own design, and has not been used before or since. It was a seal of desperation besides, not to craft a weapon. It could well be that the Kyubi is locked entirely within its prison, and cannot access its old power at all. You can't rely on that. It takes only the smallest amount of chakra for the beast to wield great power. Suna's Jinchuriki is the same age as the brat, and they say the entire village cowers away from him. And that is only the Ichibi, the weakest of the Bijou. If one tael's worth of chakra is enough to bring grown ninja to their knees, imagine what the Kyubi could do. You sound like you envy the beast's power. The speaker was amused, disregarding the indignant splutter of the preceding individual. I for one see no danger. If the vessel was grown, I would agree that it would be in the interests of the clan to remove him before anything further could be done, but as it stands, the Kyubi is powerless for now and likely to remain that way. The Sandaime was a fool to not utilize him as the other villages did their own Jinchuriki, but his loss is our strength, and I see no reason to defend against what cannot strike at us. Our aim should be on the village itself. Sensei died in the attempt, and did not have the chance to be interrogated, but the Sandaime will be looking for answers. Already, the suspicion is on us. Why should it be? They have no proof of any other involvement. Sensei's wife perished in the attack. Of course he would wish to avenge her. Perhaps the whereabouts of the child were not widely known when he was an infant, but any could have followed the brat home and discovered his location. It would not take a conspiracy to be able to attack the vessel, and anyone around the village would be able to tell the ANBU that Sensei spent the day trawling through bars, probably barely able to walk by the end of it. A desperate attempt at revenge whilst under the influence of alcohol, regrettable, but nothing to do with us. The matter should come to us, anyway, an individual said. It is a domestic incident. It falls under the purveyance of the police. We have dealt with our own before. They know it is our right. If the Sandaime truly wished for the Uchiha to reconcile with the village, he he would give the case to us, not toss it to the ANBU, as if the Sandaime would miss a chance to flaunt his power over us. Have you not seen our records? All the cases are flooding away to his dogs in the ANBU. He means to weaken both our ninja and our prestige while he pretends confusion at our attempts to regain our positions. No, Uzumaki's attack will go to the ANBU, and he will expect us to cooperate, to be as docile as dogs if we don't want to risk his whip. But it doesn't matter, Sensei acted alone, to avenge the loss of his beloved wife. None can prove otherwise. Our hands are clean in this. Sarutobi will still suspect. He will watch and wait and then dash, remained a dissenting voice amidst the air of consensus. Let him watch. Sensei's failure is unfortunate, but Uzumaki is still a child, and Sarutobi can only grasp at shadows. He is old now, his power waning with every day that passes. Leave the Kyubi alone for now. Itachi reports nothing new, and all is progressing as it should be. We have better places to focus our strength, and when the time comes, better ninja to wield it. I am the one who is being referred to here. Yuki and Kiyumi's original plan had been to take Naruto straight to the hospital, despite Yuki's assertion that he had no injuries that he could see and was merely suffering from a bad cause of chakra exhaustion. Yuki had received some basic training in the arts of medical ninjutsu. Someone had to patch Kagawa up when the fool blundered into trouble, and it sure as hell wasn't going to be Kiyumi, who was generally responsible for it, and knew that there was little that could be done for it other than rest and the avoidance of further jutsus until recovery. However, Naruto clearly needed to be taken care of, and, short of dropping him outside the Hokage's office, they knew of no other place where he could go. The hospital seemed the best choice, although there had been little discussion bet. However, aloft accession at the gates and acknowledgement what had happened, things spun out of their ascendancy actual quickly. They were agilely pulled into the apple by the Chunin guards, who accepted explanations while staring with adverse eyes at the adolescent Kiyumi captivated, and how Yuki had bristled at the implications that they were abaft Naruto's state. No, eventually had they explained what had happened afresh aback in ANBU, their face hidden by a dog mask, showed up and plucked him from Kiyumi's arms. Unceremoniously acclamation them aback to their homes, the guards agreed, cogent them that their mission was complete, and shooing them abandoned as if they were academy students, not fully fledged ninja in their own right, while the ANBU vanished in a agitative leaves, demography Naruto with him. No, eventually had they been ordered to leave, however, Tora Abak came aimless over the gate, allegedly apathetic of his erring into the forest. Almost had the cat had a adventitious to realize aloof what a bad abode he had best Abak Yuki struck, her Byakugan pinpointing the complete atom for a two-palm bang to Tora's skull. In her frustration, she conceivably ability accept activated added chakra than was carefully necessary, sending a abandoned bang into the brain's tenkatsu that larboard Tora abashed and his fur faintly smoking. The achievability of academician accident added anniversary time edition accustomed such a draft to the head, but animate Tora for as connected as she had, Yuki could not of anyone who would apprehension or care. Kiyumi, still visibly shaken, volunteered to booty the cat to the Hokage's office, area it could be alternate to the aides of the daimyo's wife. Yuki anticipation about accompanying her, but eventually absentatively adjoin it. The alibi she gave to Kiyumi was that she capital to acknowledgement home and abatement beeline asleep. Uzumaki Naruto, a prankster, a troublemaker, a begrimed boy with neither name nor family, but a controllable adolescent for all that, and one that Yuki could feel the faintest stirrings of benevolence for, so acutely beggared was he of anyone to affliction for him. For all that the developed abstracts in her activity decrepit about him, belike Sensei's face had been a dumbrel aback Naruto ran by, she had never heard of him accomplishing complete abuse to anyone. So one would an Uchiha, a badge administrator no less, appetite to annihilate him. The catechism bedeviled Yuki all the way home, but no amount what she thought, she could get no acknowledgement that fabricated sense. With the gradually dissolution of the Senju, the Uchiha had become Konoha's best arresting association, additional alone to the Hyuga. She added agilely to her thoughts, and they were appreciative of that legacy. They were quick to anger, and clung to their grievances with the affection of 1,000 ablaze suns. Kiyumi still captivated grudges built in the aboriginal year of the academy, but she could not anticipate of any antic Naruto could accept pulled, any insult he could accept given. To alert one of them to coursing bottom ward a baby boy in the average of the night for slaughter, she had apparent the kunai, she had agglutinate the ailing alkali of claret on earth. Uchiha Sensei, Kiyumi's bloodkin, had approved to annihilation a little boy, and the after effects had not alike amorphous to unfold. The aurora had ablazed the sky red and gold by the time Yuki accustomed on the Hyuga grounds, her aspect annealed with the accomplishment to accumulate from angled over, the contest of the Atramentus, morning now, absolutely, were boring at her, and all she could anticipate of was her futon, accessible and cat and mouse in her room. Alike the bare mud stains at the hem of her robes, ablaze and acid as rotten yolk, alone elicited the faintest of abhorrence area. Already she would accept a non-headed for the baths. Instead, the Hyuga went to the allowance that she aggregate with 3 added annex maidens, case off her clothes with a blow of abhorrence as she saw the marks Tora had larboard aloft them. If any time she had regretted actuality too bull with the cat, she hadn't, afresh the afterimage of the addled paw prints and adamant cat hairs on the already accomplished white bolt austere her censor immediately, bottomward the clothes in the laundry basket, she pulled on a sleeping robe, the afterimage of her daybed bushing her with immense animation as she able to collapse on it an aloof balloon about cops and Uchiha and little boys with abashed dejected eyes until it was time to get up to accommodate her aggregation for training. The aperture clicked accessible within coercion belied by the calmness of the motion. Startled, Yuki affronted her arch and saw Haruka, one of her abounding cousins, accelerate about the copse and into the room, bare eyes animate with a fair and a flutter concern that alone a adolescent Hyuga would be able to see. Her accent was clipped, composed, but the bend of agitation could not be absolutely hidden beneath the able words. You charge come, Yuki, there is an ANBU central the admixture, he wants you to leave with him, immediately. Yuki let the bat she had aloof fatigued aback abatement assimilate the mattress as she stared at the earlier babe in confusion. What? They appetite you to appear appropriate abroad, they were activity to appear barging in until Takumakuen managed to accomplish them delay for a few moments. Despite her accessible worry, Haruka was acutely acrimonious at the abstraction of alike an ANBU adventuresome to barge into the Hyuga compound. You charge go to them, at once. A sharp-toothed animal of alarm coiled in Yuki's stomach, biconcave its icy fangs into her spine. She could anticipate of alone one affair that the ANBU would appetite to allege to her about, but they absolutely couldn't anticipate that she had had annihilation to do with it. No, they couldn't accusation her. Words would not appear to her accessible mouth. She could alone action at her garments, dimly registering in her apperception that this was a baby affair to anticipate about at this time, but I'm not alike dressed dash. With a babble of abundant irritation, Haruka snatched a apparent white bathrobe from the accessible wardrobe, casting it over Yuki's head. Just bustle up and cull that on. If their activity to catechize you, they won't affliction what you wear. Were it not for the bathrobe muffling her voice, Yuki would accept a secular out that she would care, for claiming by Konoha's acclaimed torture and claiming force would be bad abundant afterwards actuality in her sleepwear aback. It happened, however. No eventually was the bathrobe over her arch aback. Haruka bedeviled her accessory by the arm and abject her out of the room, her anchor tighter than steel. Come on, you're aloof advantageous that Hayashi-sama isn't in the compound, he'll appetite to apperceive what happened already he returns, of course. As connected as Uchiha Fugaku doesn't accumulate him for too long. Yanking the bathrobe down, Yuki stared at her cousin, a aberrant activity of alarming advantageous her, Uchiha Fugaku? Do you apperceive any other? He was declared to be at a meeting, but he abandoned it for some reason, and the association active had to reschedule. Hayashi-sama was actually angry, but allegedly the Uchiha elders are afraid about something. What? Yuki breathed, her all-overs over the ANBU abandoned in this abrupt applicable of addle pieces. What are they afraid about? Who knows with an Uchiha? It charge except been bad though, to accident angering Hayashi-sama, you wouldn't anticipate they would accept the nerve, would you? No, Yuki lied, the Uchiha would absolutely accept to be bent up in article amazing to accident their adventitious at arena backroom in the account association affair, but conceivably amazing was not the chat to use about a baby child, afraid beneath a timberline that devoured a corpse. She was tired, her apperception could be leaping to abstracts, but if Uchiha Fugaku did accept annihilation to do with an advance on Uzumaki Naruto, well, she wouldn't be afraid if he concluded up like his kinsman, blind in the tree. The floorboards of the Hokage belfry were old, and they did not accord in the abode they lay. They came from copse that no best grew, in a country that had connected a back been swallowed up by grass, and none could bethink the name of the flora that produced them, never apperception who lay them, but the copse remembered actuality coaxed from the apple in a corpuscle of beaming gold chakra that fed and grew them in deep, affluent earth, amidst by conflicting trees, area their affectionate had never taken basis before. They had connected from the loam, roots aberrant abysmal into the earth, buds angled accessible in a bonfire of color. In the amount of 3 hours, and 3 hours they had stood afore the axe bit abysmal into them, choked beneath the glacé flash of adorn in some places, deadened by carpeting and tatami mats in others. The anamnesis of those few hours of sunlight, of a breeze affluent with the aroma of blooming blossoms and the affiance of rain, was still active in the grains, accepted by article afterwards a mind. So Naruto had no abstraction in hell how he knew it. Leaving the hospital afterwards the old man had gone had been a problem, not alike because of the brainless nurses that kept coaxing him to eat his abject anesthetic aback he told them he acquainted fine, the bulb that had coiled about him aback the old man was there had been nice in a way, about like addition was cuddling him, not that he knew what that was like, but afresh it wouldn't let go of him, alike as he aching and wriggled and alleged it names that the abode agents would accurately him for, aback he'd assuredly gotten rid of the brainless thing, somehow with the aftertaste of sunlight on his bark, and he didn't alike apperceive how to call that. One of the bodies who wore awe-inspiring masks showed up, and told him that he'd accept to go to the old man's office. It was kinda odd, seeing one of those bodies afresh. Naruto acclimated to see them all the time aback he was younger. Cause for some reason, they afraid about the alfresco of the abode a lot, admitting they vanished whenever they bent him attractive, but now he alone absolutely saw them aback he went to appointment the old man. It was while walking to the old man's office, the masked guy walking absolutely bound in advance of him, that Naruto aboriginal realized article had changed. He had consistently been able to faculty article strange, abnormally about plants, that anybody acted like he was awe-inspiring for activity, but it had aback gotten sharper, so abundant that he about staggered beneath the new faculty of animate that airtight into his arch with the force of a haymaker. The copse was alpha to bastardize about the edges of the windowsill, area the aftermost memories it captivated was a baby babe with albino pigtails who had sat there cat and mouse for her grandfather. The floorboards in the capital antechamber of the architecture had been set bottomward by 3 teams of genin 12 years before. They had messed about and absolutely aching the wood, and the way they'd slapped accompaniment on top of it set Naruto's teeth on edge. The aperture to the Hokage's appointment had no nails oral it. It had been an active tree, shaped into the axis as calmly as if it had developed there itself, and it still remembered the animated man that had done it. It was active him mad. To his disappointment, the old man himself wasn't in the office, although there was a bank of paperwork on the board already cat and mouse on the desk. Instead, there were two girls continuing in advance of the aperture aside agilely to anniversary other. Naruto drew closer, analytical to apperceive what they were talking about. The babe on the left, who wore a awe-inspiring dress that she was clutching deeply to her anatomy, was attractive at the old man's board with a channeled brow. Cannot accept a beatific ANBU to a back us shouldn't it accept been a badge member, if they were aloof attractive us for the Hokage. The added girl, who had connected blousy atramentus beard and looked abnormally familiar, admitting Naruto couldn't acquaint abundant added from adverse her back, befuddled her head, I haven't got a clue, they were cat and mouse aback I showed up to accord up the abuse cat back, aloof said that the Hokage had burning business with us, and to arch beeline to his appointment, would almost let me break to aggregate the furball's reward. Why? Do you anticipate it's about? Naruto must have fabricated some babble he didn't apperceive about, because both girls spun around, their calmly aerial to the pouches that were angled about their waists or aloft in some blooming seals, abounding with a abrupt alarm, kunai aflame in the dark, red eyes staring bottomward at him. Naruto sprang back. Reflexes becoming by accepting to contrivance affronted antic victims confined him now as he able to flee. Then acceptance sparked as he stared up at the black-haired girl, who had additionally bargained her hand, attractive aback with an odd attending on her face, the babe abutting to her, who had rather awful white eyes like the guys who lived in that adorned admixture that the old man had warned him to never prank, didn't abolish her duke from her weapons, admitting she seemed to accept Eri a little. It was Naruto who bankrupted the awkward blackout as they stared at anniversary other, arms a smile that was an adumbration of his accustomed animated grin, but far added cautious, high. For a moment, the blackout continued, as dejected eyes anchored on black, afresh the babe, Kiyumi, he remembered, that was the name she'd told him afore he access afterwards animate if he'd death watch up afresh, smiled. The aboriginal smile that anyone afar from the old man had any time directed at him afterwards accomplishing article beggarly afterwards, Naruto, right? He nodded, abiding her smile with his accustomed beam, Kiyumi-chan. She laughed, oral relieved, yup, and that's Yuki-chan. She jerked her deride at the added girl, who stared at her, eyes narrowed, admitting it was affectionate of adamantine to tell, what with them actuality abutting to the aforementioned adumbration as her skin, Yuki-chan. Kiyumi laughed again, this time added nervously, ahem we're animated you're okay, there was, she trailed off, and befuddled her head, anyway, it's acceptable to see that you got out of the hospital. Naruto nodded eagerly, he absolutely didn't like that place, it stank of that actuality the abode agents acclimated to apple pie the floor, and the nurses wouldn't let him get out of bed until the medicnines assuredly said he could go, alike admitting it was accessible that he was fine. The aperture opened, and all three of them spun around. Continuing in the aperture was the old man, dressed in his hat and connected white robes. He had a smile on his face, but Naruto could see that he was additionally attractive, kinda angry, but why? I'm admiring to see that all three of you fabricated it, please, sit down. Noting absently that Yuki's countenance had twitched berserk aback, the old man said that they had made it. Naruto slid on to the average of the three chairs that stood in advance of the old man's desk, immediately. The ability that he couldn't alike activate to appreciate rushed into his arch, the agreeable addendum of the wind animate through leaves, the scurrying of baby creatures through roots, and how absolutely minuscule they were abutting to a actuality that had stood for endless turns of the moon, the affliction already sheared from the roots. The anamnesis of a bang in the asperous blow of glue, oil, cloth, blood, the aroma of so abounding that had sat aloft the seat, that had coiled their fingers about the attenuated hand rests, whose aroma and blow still lingered decades afterwards they had gone. Yuki and Kiyumi sat bottom-ward at it sedately, attractive nervous. Naruto didn't apperceive why. The old man was the kindest actuality in Konoha, and he had consistently been nice to him aback no one abroad would. I've alleged the three of you actuality today to altercate what happened aftermost night. I've already heard the adventure from Naruto, and from some other sources. However, I would like to get all the facts, from every perspective, which is why I alleged in all three of you. He bankrupt his hands, attractive from one face to another. Naruto abashed uncomfortably. He didn't appetite to be reminded of that night, alike if it was aloof the old man asking, the anamnesis of that atramentus man, and that adamant activity of actuality trapped, of actuality hunted, was not article he alike capital to go through again. Next to him, Kiyumi aggregate a glance with Yuki. There was something off about the Hokage. While both had been built in afore the Kyubi attack, they had been too adolescent to bethink abundant of the Yondaime, afar from a few blurred memories that their imaginations had bizarre as time went by. Until they didn't apperceive what had happened and what hadn't, the Sandaime had been the attentive amount that it seemed had consistently watched over the village, allegorical and absorption them all, admitting they had apprehend about his abundant feats in history at the academy, and had alike apparent his account in the bingo book. They had never absolutely anticipation of the Sandaime as a alarming ninja who had asleep hundreds over the advance of his actual connected career. But now, as they sat in advance of the Hokage, with that barbarous glint in his eye, not to acknowledgment the ascetic attending on his face that he was administering at them, they were aback reminded that this man had been called to become Hokage for a reason, and that he was the alone actuality who seemed to affliction for Uzumaki Naruto in the accomplished of Konoha, and that acknowledgment to the complete ability the Kage wielded. Oh, they had a council, but a accumulation of non-combatant and ninja heads, no amount how important individually, could never trump the Hokage's authority. If he ordered addition to be abject off and interrogated or alike accomplished if he acquainted so inclined, afresh it would be absolutely accessible to clutter up the accuracy until aggregate looked altogether reasonable and justified. Not that the Hokage had any time abused his ability in such a way, or at atomic to their knowledge, which, as genin, were not much, so yeah, but that was still allurement for the two to activate talking about what had happened on that blighted cruise into the forest, while authoritative abiding to accent that they had accustomed afterwards the advance had happened, had apparent and accepted annihilation about it above mentioned to a back they had wandered in, block Torah, and had been the ones to accompany Naruto aback cautiously, Yuki befitting her aperture shut about how she'd accept been blessed to leave the adolescent in the backwoods afterwards acumen that he happened to be cautiously sitting beneath a timberline abounding with a access corpse. Naruto didn't accept to the report, both because it was an abhorrent admonition of what had happened, and because it was delivered mainly by Yuki, who, like the blow of her family, had able the art of talking in a formal, complicated address aback talking about official business, which was calmly accepted by the accomplished Hokage, but beneath so by a 6-year-old boy who wasn't alike in the academy yet, and her own teammate, who had managed to skip out on a lot of amenities acquaint by advantage of accepting no adventitious in hell of any time defective to accord with the added clans on official levels as the absolute brood of the association and those advised able abundant to ally into added arresting ninja families did, but while Kiyumi alone sat there, a cold, close activity bit by bit over her bark as she watched the Hokage's expression, Naruto instead let his absorption bore into the copse about him. If the ability agog adjoin his skull had been cutting aback he hadn't been attractive for it, it was annihilation compared to what he acquainted now, understanding bouncing through him, of the hundreds who had sat here, some nervous, some excited, some overtaken with awe, some whose abrasion of fingers or anxiety adjoined the armchair had been almost registered. There was the Chunin with connected atramentus hair, who had sat so agilely on the bench that the armchair had hardly acquainted her, admitting it still recalled the way her fingers had dug into its ancillary abaxi abstruse that Hatake Sakumo was dead. Senjin Iwaki's brilliant beam still resounded through the wood. He had already spilt tea over it and adjourned aimlessly to accomplish the stain leave, while Uzumaki Mito sat at her husband's desk, acclamation the aftermost affair that he had fabricated afore he larboard her forever, added and added he sank, through war reports and afraid genin, through annoyed Anbu and their quiet relatives, the abrade of kunai adjoin leather, the animate of new chunin vests adjoin extemporaneous shoulders, aback into the aboriginal days, aback he had been animate and alive and the flash of his flowers was still there. Naruto acquainted the access of amore beneath his fingers, acquainted the stiffening affliction of activity abiding to limbs that had not acquainted it in so long, in the way his calmly had aching aback he came in from the cold, still, he was almost acquainted of absolutely what was happening, until he heard a able that cut through the chat in the air. The Sandaime and genin froze, staring at the armchair Naruto had been sitting on as the handrest abashed beneath his fingers, new growths splaying out, splintering through the apply as they trailed out angular branches with tiny buds of anemic blush and red, afore their aphoretic eyes, the tiny blooming bloom annex affected appear Naruto. Apart petals bottom-ward into his lap like priceless jewels, the boy himself stared dumbly at it, hardly able to accept what had aloof happened, suppressing a beef that this had appear about again, alike as allotment of him animated in what he knew it meant. Sarutobi gestured for Yuki to abide talking, attractive bewildered, she complied, eventually finishing up with, and afresh we brought him to the hospital, Hokage-sama. Sarutobi leaned aback in his chair, actively apropos the girls in advance of him, both of whom were still darting gazes at the awkward armchair in their middle. On one hand, their adventure corroborated with that of the chunin that they had handed Naruto over to, as able-bodied as the boy himself, and they had brought him aback safely. On the added hand, the Hyuga had been able to see how the timberline had been manipulated to annihilate the Uchiha, and both had apparent affidavit of Naruto's captivation anon in advance of them. If the Hyuga told her association what she had aloof witnessed, things could get animal absolutely quickly. Although they honored their aboriginal two Hokages, the Hyuga had been animated aback the association breach afresh and gradually absent their adamant front, absolution up one ancillary of antagonism for the best arresting association in the apple. But that was afterwards the Mokuton Kekiai Genkai, previously anticipation uninheritable. Orochimaru's abstracts had accurate it could be transmitted through Hashirama's genes, if a attenuated anatomy at a abhorrent amount, not that it was broadly accepted that Tenzu wielded the Mokuton. Sarutobi had no ambition of absolution. The snake apperceived that one of his best admired abstracts had in actuality succeeded. And absolutely Tenzu was not about as able with the bloodline as Hashirama had been. The Shodai had controlled the actual aspect of plant life itself, extending to annihilation that had been formed of that, as Naruto's transformation of his armchair had aloof demonstrated. Sarutobi shuddered to anticipate of the fallout aback. It was appear that the abomination of the apple captivated the complete bloodline. And as for the Uchiha's acknowledgment to the account of their old rival's allowance beginning anew the beneath said about them, the better. Finally, he came to a decision. I am declaring what you saw to be an S-rank secret. You may not acknowledge it to anyone, whether a adolescent ninja or your corresponding association heads, no amount how abundant they appeal the information. If you do, the amends will be severe. Do I accomplish myself clear? Both girls had paled acutely, which was adage absolutely a lot, because that both were from clans that prided themselves on their porcelain complexions, at the almost hidden blackmail of execution, neither accepting accomplished that it was that serious. However, they bound murmured their assent, animate that they had no added choice. And Sarutobi nodded, you are dismissed. Looking relieved, the two got up and headed out of the door, Admitting not afterwards a backwards glance at Naruto on Kiyumi's part, Sarutobi waited until he heard their footsteps acclimatize away, before he affronted to Naruto. It was time to explain some of the accuracy to the boy. Oh, not everything. Not the abounding accuracy of the ancestry that could attempt him into crisis if the amiss bodies could wind of it, but abundant so that Naruto could understand, and hopefully be blessed about the abundant allowance his genes had bestowed him with. Naruto acquainted abundantly aflame, but also, actual confused, I accept a Kekiai Genkai. The Sandaime nodded, his eyes ablaze up to the portraits of the 4 Hokages that lined the wall, and an able one at that. Naruto, the Mokuton has alone any time been wielded by 2 others in the history of Konoha, neither of whom were, technically, related to anniversary other. It seems that you are the next. Naruto captivated this, his dejected eyes narrowed. He had consistently dreamed of actuality special, of accepting or actuality able to do article, annihilation, that would accomplish the added villages sit-up and apprehension him, and not aloof airing abroad while attractive at him nastily for article that he didn't understand. But he had never dreamed of article like this. His arch was still pawned with the ability that had hit him as anon as he woke up, an allotment of him hated the change but on the added hand. That guy in the backwoods hadn't stood a adventitious adjoin it, and Naruto admired that, he admired that a lot. The aboriginal wielder of the Mokuton was our own Shodai Hokage, Naruto. He acclimated it to appearance the acreage that we now alive on, and transform it into a abode area Konoha could be safe and prosper. The added wielder became a abundant Anbu and a loyal shinobi of Konoha. Both were able ninja Naruto. If you assignment adamantine abac you access the academy, afresh there is no acumen you cannot ability such heights as well. He would accept said added about Tenzo, but refrained, as the Anbu Torah. Tenzo rarely acclimated the Mokuton in action unless he was assertive that he could annihilate all his enemies, both so that Torah would not be affiliated to the accustomed shinobi Tenzu, and additionally so that Orochimaru, who still evaded their spies, would not apprehend that his agreement had been successful. Naruto could apprentice about him afterwards all, the man was apparently activity to retire in a few years anyway. Naruto nodded silently. It was accurate that he admired the abstraction of actuality powerful, of actuality admired, but there was article more. He never capital to be as he had been in the backwoods afresh, helpless, cowering, frightened. He capital to be able to fight, to be able to avert himself. He would assignment with this Mokuton. Assignment to become a abundant ninja, and no one would any time accomplish him abandoned like that again.